imagine for a second, like you live in a major U.S. metropolitan county,
Right.
a massive, sprawling urban center, with all the logistical complexities, the density, and, well, the systemic challenges you'd expect from a major city.
Yeah, a really complex system to manage.
Exactly. Now, consider what it would take for that county to actually close down an entire jail facility.
Which is, I mean, it's basically unheard of in modern criminal justice.
It is, and
Okay.
not because of like a temporary budget shortfall or a political stunt, but because they fundamentally engineered a system where they simply didn't need the beds anymore.
Yeah, they structurally eliminated the demand for those cells.
Right. And this same county saved taxpayers an estimated $12 million a year in the process.
An incredible figure.
But here is the really counterintuitive, just paradigm-shifting metric. They achieved this while reducing the recidivism rate for nonviolent felonies among a very specific, highly vulnerable population from an abysmal 75% down to just 6%.
Going from a 3/4 failure rate to a 6% failure rate is, well, it's the kind of statistical anomaly that forces you to rethink everything you know about criminal justice.
Yeah, it completely breaks the mold. And the way they pulled this off wasn't by, building a more secure prison or hiring 100 more prosecutors.
No, not at all.
It was by making this structural realization that a courtroom is just the absolute wrong environment to solve a mental health crisis.
It represents a staggering shift in civic architecture, really. We are so deeply conditioned to view the justice system, and specifically the courtroom itself, as the ultimate sorting mechanism for societal dysfunction.
Right, like someone does something wrong and they just get tossed in the funnel.
Exactly. If someone breaks a rule, they go into the funnel and the court decides where to place them. But what we're going to examine today proves that sometimes the most effective form of justice, the one that actually secures public safety, is systemic diversion.
Diversion meaning?
Meaning it's about building an off-ramp, right? Building it before the person ever reaches that sorting mechanism in the first place.
And that structural shift is the mission of our deep dive today. We're exploring the Criminal Mental Health Project, or the CMHP, and the highly specialized treatment courts operating down in Miami-Dade County, Florida.
Yeah, Miami-Dade is really the focal point here.
Right, and the objective for us, for you listening, is to understand the broader goals of these specialized courts. We need to look under the hood at how this machinery functions on a daily basis.
Because it is a massive piece of machinery.
It really is. And we want to look at the 20-year administrative and legislative fight it took to build it. Plus, why major cities across the country, places dealing with massive overcrowding, are currently looking to Miami as, like, the gold standard for overhauling how a city operates.
What makes this examination so compelling, I think, isn't just the sheer human compassion embedded in these programs.
No, the compassion is definitely there.
Oh, absolutely, it's evident. But the broader goal of Miami-Dade specialized courts is rooted in undeniable hard data.
Right.
The administrative tracking here makes a mathematically airtight case. It proves that systemic integration, shared data pools, and targeted clinical treatment are vastly more efficient than the traditional cycle of endless incarceration.
And they yield vastly better public safety outcomes, too.
Precisely. It's not just cheaper, it's safer.
But to really grasp those broader goals, we have to start at the breaking point, right? Because the system in Miami didn't change because everything was running smoothly.
No, it changed because it was experiencing catastrophic systemic failure.
Yeah. So we have to look at the landscape of the county prior to these reforms, specifically regarding a concept in the data known as the high utilizer.
Right. The high utilizer is a crucial concept for understanding why traditional policing and jailing fails so spectacularly.
How so?
Well, in any urban justice system, crime and resource strain, they aren't evenly distributed across the population.
That makes sense.
Instead, you have a relatively small, highly concentrated group of individuals who place an extraordinary, really disproportionate demand on public resources.
So in the context of what we are discussing, who are these people?
These are individuals suffering from severe, often completely untreated mental illnesses. We're talking about schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder, or compounding substance abuse disorders.
And the tracking of this specific subgroup in Miami-Dade reveals numbers that are almost hard to comprehend.
They really are.
Like, there was a cohort of these high utilizers that the county monitored closely. And over just a 5-year period, this relatively small, defined group of people collectively spent over 300,000 days in jail.
300,000 days. Just think about that for a second.
That's wild.
If you break down the daily municipal cost to house, feed, provide basic medical triage, and guard an inmate, the financial burden of that single cohort is astronomical.
It's just a massive black hole for tax dollars.
But the operational reality is even worse. These individuals were caught in a persistent revolving door.
Right.
They were cycling repeatedly through county jails, getting released back onto the streets with no support, and then inevitably experiencing another severe psychiatric crisis.
Because nothing was actually fixed.
Exactly. So they'd end up in emergency rooms, get discharged when they were technically stable but not actually treated, and eventually get arrested again for a public nuisance or a low-level offense.
It's a closed loop of systemic failure.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
The jail basically serves as a very expensive, very temporary holding tank, but it does absolutely nothing to address the psychosis or the addiction that caused the arrest in the first place.
Nothing at all.
But the catalyst for changing this entire system wasn't like a think tank report or a federal mandate.
No, it was much more personal than that.
Yeah, it started with a highly personal moment of clarity for a local judge named Steve Leifman back in the year 2000.
Judge Leifman was presiding over what seemed, on the docket at least, like a routine case.
Just another day in court.
Right. But the reality inside the courtroom was anything but routine. The defendant standing before him was suffering from severe mental illness and was actively experiencing a psychotic episode right there in front of the bench.
Oh, wow.
And the defendant's parents were also present in the courtroom, deeply distressed, and they were pleading with the judge to understand the medical context of their son's behavior.
And this is where the story takes a turn, because the parents look at Judge Leifman and they state quite plainly that their son knows more about the mental health system than the judge does.
Which is quite a statement to make to a judge.
Yeah. I mean, a judge could easily take offense to a comment like that from a defendant's family. It sounds like a direct insult to the court's authority.
Right, but then the context is revealed.
And the context changes everything. The parents explain that their son, the man currently standing before the judge in a state of severe, untreated psychosis, facing criminal charges, was actually the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital.
Which is one of the primary medical institutions in the region.
Think about the implications of that. The former head of psychiatry at a major regional hospital is now a criminal defendant, actively psychotic, and completely failed by the very medical and legal infrastructure he used to help manage.
It's chilling. For Judge Leifman, this was the ultimate proof of a broken system.
I can imagine.
If the local infrastructure could completely fail, a former chief of psychiatry, someone who inherently possessed education, financial resources, and a deep, intimate knowledge of how the medical system works, what possible hope was there for an indigent, homeless individual suffering from schizophrenia?
Zero. There was zero hope.
Exactly. It demonstrated that the civic safety net wasn't just frayed. It effectively did not exist in any functional capacity.
So rather than just continuing to process the docket and ignore it, Leifman decides to initiate a structural intervention.
He essentially forces the issue.
Yeah, in 2000, he manages to convene this massive summit of all the major stakeholders in Miami-Dade. This was funded by the Samacha Gain Center, right?
Yes. The Gain Center is a federal program that focuses on the intersection of adults with behavioral health needs and the justice system.
So they essentially forced everyone into a single room. We're talking police chiefs, defense attorneys, state prosecutors, judges, mental health providers, social workers, and crucially, consumers of the system and their families.
It's a vital piece, including the consumers.
Definitely. And the directive for this massive meeting was to map out exactly how the justice system and the mental health system interacted.
And the conclusion from that system mapping exercise was just stark. The overarching problem wasn't a lack of effort from individual actors.
Right, people were trying.
People were trying very hard. But the problem was a complete lack of formalized coordination. The system was entirely siloed.
Meaning everyone was just doing their own thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Law enforcement officers were doing their specific job, the courts were doing theirs, and the hospitals were doing theirs. But none of these distinct administrative silos were communicating with each other.
So a hospital would discharge a patient without telling the community clinic.
Right. And then the person would stop taking their medication, the police would arrest them, and the judge would have no access to their medical history to know why it happened. It was a recipe for disaster. If the goal is public safety, that disjointed approach actively works against it.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second here for the listener. Isn't a judge's job just to rule on the law, not like fix the entire healthcare system.
That's a common pushback, yeah.
I mean, it's like a referee suddenly deciding they need to rewrite the rule book because the game itself is injuring the players.
It is like that. But the response to this realization was the adoption of a framework called the sequential intercept model.
Okay, tell me about that.
The core philosophy here is that if the criminal justice system has become the default asylum for the county, you can't just fix it by hiring more therapists at the jail. You have to intercept the individual at every possible touch point before they reach the jail cell.
So you rewrite the rule book because you have to.
Exactly. The sequential intercept model, or SIM, is a brilliant way to visualize the architecture of a community's response to a crisis. It views the justice system not as a single entity, but as a series of gateways or intercepts.
Break those down for me.
Sure. So Intercept 0 is the community crisis hotlines, mobile crisis teams.
Okay.
Intercept 1 is law enforcement on the street. Intercept 2 is initial detention and court hearings. And Intercept 3 involves jails and specialized courts.
Okay, I see.
So the broader goal of Miami-Dade's specialized courts became clear. They needed to build clinical off-ramps at every single one of those intercepts to catch people before they fell further down the funnel.
Which takes us right into the actual daily machinery of the Criminal Mental Health Project, the CMHP.
The real boots-on-the-ground work.
Exactly. Because if you want to stop this revolving door, you have to execute this model practically. You have to catch people at Intercept 1.
Which means looking at pre-booking diversion.
Right. And that places the responsibility squarely on the front lines, which is law enforcement.
And historically, law enforcement officers have been placed in an incredibly difficult position regarding mental health.
Yeah, they're not doctors.
No, they're not. They are dispatched to respond to a person experiencing a crisis on the street, perhaps someone acting erratically, shouting at traffic, or trespassing.
And for decades, what were their options?
Well, the safest, fastest, and most legally straightforward mechanism for an officer to clear that scene and restore public order was to make an arrest for a minor public order offense.
Just to get them out of there.
Exactly. The officer isn't trying to be cruel. They simply have no other logistical option to remove the person from a dangerous situation.
But Miami-Dade overhauled this dynamic entirely, didn't they?
They did.
They used Crisis Intervention Team, or CIT, training. And this is the part that blows my mind. They didn't just train a specialized squad of, 10 guys?
No, the scale was massive.
Over 9,500 police officers across every single municipal agency in Miami-Dade County. They systematically taught the entire police force psychiatric de-escalation.
And training nearly 10,000 officers requires a massive cultural shift in policing. CIT training is highly specific.
Right. It's not just a generic seminar on being nice.
No, not at all. It isn't just a seminar on empathy. It teaches officers the mechanical realities of serious mental illnesses.
Like what?
For example, if an officer understands that a person with schizophrenia might be experiencing severe sensory overload and auditory hallucinations, the officer learns to lower their voice, turn off their vehicle sirens, slow their physical movements, and create physical space.
They use specific psychological tactics to verbally de-escalate a volatile situation instead of just using physical force.
Exactly. And the most important part of the CIT training is giving the officer a different destination.
Right. Instead of putting the person in the back of a squad car and driving to the county jail, they safely redirect that individual to an emergency psychiatric facility.
The officer actually has an off-ramp to use.
And the operational data from this shift is staggering. Listen to this data drop. Between 2010 and 2015, county law enforcement in Miami-Dade responded to 48,669 mental health calls.
Nearly 50,000 encounters.
Yes, out of nearly 50,000 encounters with individuals in severe psychiatric distress, only 109 of those encounters resulted in an arrest.
Just over 100 arrests out of nearly 50,000 calls.
That is insane. That means in over 99% of those interactions, the police successfully diagnosed the situation as a health crisis rather than a criminal one, de-escalated the individual, and diverted them to clinical care.
That is the sequential intercept model working perfectly at the street level.
Intercept 1 in action.
It is an incredible metric for public safety. But, as effective as CIT is, you cannot intercept every single crisis at the street level.
Right. Sometimes an arrest has to happen.
Exactly. There will always be individuals whose behavior or the severity of the incident requires a formal arrest. The community still needs a safety net for those who slip past Intercept 1.
Which brings us to the safety net operating inside the jail itself. Post-booking diversion.
This is Intercept 2 and 3.
Right. So, if someone does get arrested for a misdemeanor or a nonviolent felony and they are booked into the county jail, the system has a secondary triage mechanism.
And how does that work?
Well, the CMHP steps in if that individual meets the criteria for severe mental illness, usually meaning they are exhibiting clear, acute symptoms that would warrant involuntary medical hospitalization.
And the defining feature of this post-booking diversion is speed.
Yes, speed is crucial,
The
Hilo.
administrative data highlights a crucial window. Within 3 days of booking, eligible individuals are completely transferred out of the jail environment.
They don't just sit in a concrete cell for weeks.
No, they don't sit there waiting for a psychiatric evaluation while their mental state rapidly deteriorates. They are physically moved into community-based crisis stabilization units.
And the outcomes from this rapid post-booking triage are exactly what allowed the county to close a jail facility.
It's the mechanism behind the headline.
Right. By aggressively shifting the focus to these community stabilization units, the recidivism rate for misdemeanors dropped from 75% down to 20%.
A massive drop.
But the stat for nonviolent felony offenders with severe mental illness is the one that really anchors the broader goals of these courts. Like we said at the start, recidivism fell from 75% to just 6%.
Consider the compounding mechanical effect of that specific reduction, too.
What do you mean?
Well, when you drop a felony recidivism rate to 6%, the county isn't just avoiding the cost of a single subsequent arrest. They're effectively preventing the 10, 20, or 30 future arrests that individual would have inevitably accrued under the old punitive model.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the downstream savings are huge.
Exactly. The tracking estimates that these diversion programs saved Miami-Dade County between 35 and 40 years worth of jail bed days.
40 years of jail bed days, that is decades of human life not spent sitting in a cell and millions of dollars in municipal resources freed up.
It is a brilliant reallocation of resources, and they are pushing this pre-booking philosophy even further through widespread education.
Right. In 2022, the project secured a 5-year grant from Sam Usha focused on mental health awareness training, or MHAT.
The underlying logic there is fascinating, right?
Yeah, it's like, if de-escalation works so well for street cops, why not teach it to the rest of the civic ecosystem?
It's about building a web of community resilience. They're using the MHA grant to train court clerks, correctional staff, defense attorneys, state prosecutors, and crucially, the families of the individuals suffering from behavioral health disorders.
They're teaching mental health first aid across the board.
Exactly. This means if a family member learns how to recognize the early warning signs of a manic episode and can de-escalate the situation at home, the 911 call never happens.
Intercept zero.
Yes, intercept zero. And if a court clerk notices a defendant starting to decompensate in the courthouse waiting room, they can flag the issue to a clinician before the defendant has an outburst that leads to a contempt charge.
It fundamentally changes the civic environment from a punitive, reactionary system to a preventative one.
That is exactly the broader goal at work here. But, stabilizing an immediate psychiatric crisis, catching the falling glass, so to speak, is really only the first step.
Right, because providing someone with acute medical detox or 3 days of stabilization doesn't magically solve the underlying issues.
Not at all. The specialized courts in Miami-Dade understand that they must address the deeply rooted, long-term traumas and addictions that drive chronic criminal behavior over years or even decades.
This shifts our focus to the highly targeted court tracks operating within the 11th Judicial Circuit. Because the CMHP manages the immediate triage, but for specific populations with deeply ingrained issues, they built entirely separate judicial pathways.
Let's look at the Veterans Treatment Court, the VTC, which targets a very specific demographic challenge in the county.
Yeah, Miami-Dade has a substantial veteran population. We're talking over 48,000 veterans residing in the county.
And a significant number of these individuals return from their military service carrying profound, invisible wounds. We are talking about severe post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, and the heavy substance abuse disorders that frequently develop as a way to self-medicate those service-related traumas.
And when those unaddressed traumas inevitably lead to an arrest for a nonviolent felony or a misdemeanor, the standard court system just doesn't know what to do with them.
They're not equipped for it.
But the VTC offers a totally different, highly structured off-ramp. It is a pre-trial, completely voluntary program.
But we need to be very clear about what voluntary means here.
Yeah, because it certainly does not mean easy. The framework requires a 12 to 24-month commitment to a grueling judicially monitored track divided into 5 distinct phases.
The mechanics of the VTC blend intense accountability with massive clinical support.
Walk me through what that actually looks like for a participant.
Sure. To progress through the 5 phases of the program, participants are subjected to a rigorous daily and weekly regimen. They must maintain strict, verifiable abstinence from drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
They have to attend court sessions with high frequency standing before the judge every 30 to 45 days to provide a detailed update on their progress.
So they aren't just checking a box on a form, they are being actively monitored by the bench.
Exactly. They also have to comply with highly individualized case plans, but the court recognizes that you can't demand that level of compliance without providing the infrastructure to achieve it.
Right, you can't just tell someone to get better and not help them.
Exactly. So in exchange for this intense monitoring, the VTC surrounds the veteran with a massive support structure. They receive peer mentoring from other veterans who understand the specific cultural nuances of military trauma.
That peer connection is huge.
It is. They also get comprehensive behavioral health care, and vitally, they get direct administrative help with housing, childcare, and transportation.
Because the underlying logic of the court is practical, right?
Yeah.
You cannot successfully treat a severe substance abuse disorder if the individual is sleeping under an overpass and has no physical way to get to their mandatory therapy appointments.
The holistic, logistical needs of the individual must be met, or the legal diversion will inevitably fail.
But if the veteran successfully navigates this 12 to 24-month gauntlet, the legal reward is substantial.
Very substantial.
For first-time offenders who graduate, their pending charges are dismissed entirely through a nulla prosequi. Their records can even be sealed or expunged, which protects their future ability to secure employment and housing.
And for offenders with prior records who complete the program, adjudication is withheld, allowing them to avoid a formal conviction on their record.
And a nearly identical philosophy operates within the adult drug court, right?
Yes, which handles eligible drug offenders who don't necessarily have a military background.
Right, and this is strongly supported by the Miami-Dade State Attorney, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle. This court redirects individuals away from standard prosecution and into a supervised rehabilitation program that lasts a minimum of 1 year.
Utilizing evidence-based clinical assessments and random frequent drug testing to verify compliance.
Well, wait, let me channel a skeptical listener for a second. Let's address a very natural counter-argument that arises when looking at these programs.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you commit a felony and you go to therapy for a year and then the court completely drops your charges, critics are absolutely going to look at that as a massive loophole. How does the court ensure this isn't just viewed as a get-out-of-jail-free card that is overly lenient on crime?
It is a vital question, and it requires us to look completely objectively at the operational mechanics of both systems, setting aside any ideological debate about being tough on crime.
Right, just look at the reality.
When a critic views diversion as lenient, they are generally comparing it to the concept of a long, harsh prison sentence. But for the vast majority of these nonviolent lower-level offenses, the standard judicial outcome is not years in state prison.
It's not like they were facing a life sentence anyway.
Exactly. The standard outcome is a relatively short stint in the county jail, perhaps 30, 60, or 90 days.
Right, they do a few months in county, and then they are released.
And let's look at the mechanics of those 60 days. In a standard jail sentence, the individual sits in a cell. They receive absolutely no clinical treatment for the schizophrenia or the opioid addiction that caused the crime.
None at all.
While they are incarcerated, they lose their employment. They lose their apartment because they can't pay rent. So, 60 days later, they are released back onto the street. They are completely destabilized, deeply entrenched in their addiction or psychosis, and practically guaranteed to reoffend.
The system essentially guarantees failure.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with the mechanical reality of the diversion courts. A participant in the drug court or veterans court is agreeing to 12 to 24 months of relentless monitoring.
Right, compared to just 60 days sitting around.
Exactly. They are subjected to random drug screens. They are mandated to attend intense group and individual therapy sessions multiple times a week. They are required to secure employment or maintain stable housing.
That's a lot of work.
They have to stand before a judge every month and take personal accountability for their actions.
So functionally, spending 1 to 2 years actively rewriting your own behavioral patterns while being constantly monitored by the state is significantly harder than just sitting on a cot in a jail cell for 2 months.
It requires vastly more effort and personal accountability. But the most important metric is the outcome.
The data.
Right. The data unequivocally demonstrates that this longer, harder path of forced rehabilitation yields vastly better societal safety outcomes.
Yeah.
The community is demonstrably safer because the root cause of the criminal behavior has been neutralized, rather than just paused for 60 days.
But keeping people out of jail creates a massive logistical vacuum, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, if you intercept someone on the street or you pull them out of jail within 3 days, where exactly do you send them? If they aren't sleeping in a cell, where do they sleep tonight?
Ah, right.
Because diverting a vulnerable person back into a fractured, disjointed community healthcare system is just setting them up to fall through the cracks again. Miami realized they had to physically build the answer to that question.
This is the ultimate logistical hurdle of diversion. The original crisis in 2000 wasn't just that the police were arresting two-night people.
It was that the community healthcare infrastructure was completely inadequate.
Exactly. You cannot divert someone to a clinic that has a 6-month waiting list.
So Miami-Dade did something structurally revolutionary. They built a massive physical embodiment of the specialized court's broader goals, the Miami Center for Mental Health and Recovery.
Yes.
This is a 160,000 square foot facility located in the Alapata neighborhood. And the architectural history of the building itself is perfectly symbolic. It is a converted, decommissioned forensic state treatment facility.
The Alapata facility represents the culmination of nearly 2 decades of agonizing administrative persistence by Judge Leifman and his coalition.
20 years of pushing for this.
Yeah. The operational design of this building is focused on eliminating the administrative friction that causes vulnerable people to abandon treatment. The guiding philosophy is under one roof.
It functions almost like a closed-loop ecosystem for human recovery.
Right, because consider the logistical nightmare of a normal city's safety net. A person struggling with severe mental illness might have to go to one clinic across town for medical detox.
Okay, that's one stop.
Then they have to figure out how to take 2 different buses to reach an agency that handles housing assistance. Then they have to find a completely different office for primary medical care. And finally, they have to navigate public transit to show up at a downtown courthouse for their legal hearings.
It's exhausting just hearing about it. For an individual who is cognitively impaired, suffering from paranoia, or battling severe physical withdrawal, navigating that kind of fragmented bureaucratic maze is functionally impossible.
It is a barrier to entry that guarantees failure.
But the Alapata facility solves this by consolidating a comprehensive continuum of care into one single massive building. It contains 208 total beds, and those beds are divided into a very specific clinical pathway that maps out the mechanical journey of recovery.
Right, let's look at the phases of that pathway. Phase 1 focuses on crisis stabilization and detoxification.
Okay, so this is immediate triage.
Yes. This is a highly acute 10-bed unit. It is designed for individuals who are entering directly from police custody or from street-level diversion who require immediate psychiatric containment and supervised medical detox.
So the priority is keeping them alive, getting the substances out of their system safely, and achieving baseline chemical stability.
Precisely. And once they are medically stable, they move to Phase 2, which is short-term rehabilitation. This is a 20-bed unit where the focus shifts to active clinical therapy.
So they start dialing in the correct pharmacological treatments.
Yes, finding the right dosage of psychiatric medication, and they begin the foundational work of behavioral recovery.
And then there's Phase 3, which is where the long-term systemic intervention happens.
Phase 3 is residential level 2 treatment. This is a much larger 45-bed unit designed for transitional living.
So what are they doing in this phase?
The clinical focus here shifts heavily toward cognitive rehabilitation. This means relearning adaptive life skills that have eroded during years of homelessness or addiction.
Like what?
Like learning how to manage a daily routine, how to adhere to a medication schedule, and they engage in comprehensive housing navigation so that when they finally discharge from the facility, they have a stable, permanent place to live.
It's basically structured like a shopping mall, but instead of retail, every storefront is a different tool for rebuilding a human life.
That's a great analogy.
Because the clinical pathways are incredible, but the structural features of this building, the actual layout, are what make it a true closed-loop ecosystem. Inside this 160,000 square foot building, they built a primary care medical clinic.
Because physical health is tied to mental health.
Exactly. They also built a dental clinic, recognizing that severe dental pain and oral health decay are massive, often overlooked drivers of chronic addiction and misery.
It's a huge issue.
They have vocational and employment training centers. And, Most astonishingly, they built a fully functional courtroom right inside the treatment facility.
Integrating the courtroom into the clinical space is an absolute masterstroke of civic engineering. It fundamentally alters the dynamic of the justice system.
Right, because hearings can occur without ever breaking the chain of care.
There is no need for a patient to be handcuffed, loaded into a transport van, and driven across town to a holding cell. There is no risk of a patient missing their crucial afternoon medication because they're sitting in a courthouse basement waiting for a judge to call their name.
The legal accountability happens within the exact same walls as the medical healing.
It functions like the ultimate triage hospital, where the system is specifically designed so that the patient never has to navigate the bureaucracy themselves. The services come to them.
But, of course, funding a massive 160,000 square foot closed-loop ecosystem is a monumental financial undertaking.
It is not cheap.
No, it required a massive coalition of funding streams. The capital to actually build and renovate the facility came from general obligation bonds, about $34 million total, approved by voters and the County Public Health Trust.
But building the facility is only half the battle, right?
Right.
Operating it requires continuous, substantial cash flow. The administrative structure involves operational agreements for a combined $31 million, plus estimated ongoing operating costs of about $14 million.
And what is particularly noteworthy is where a significant portion of this operational funding is sourced from.
Yes, from Florida's opioid manufacturer settlement allocations.
There is a profound, almost poetic, mechanical justice to that. They are utilizing the financial settlements from the exact pharmaceutical companies that actively fueled the addiction crisis and directly channeling those funds into operating the recovery center designed to treat the victims of that crisis.
It's incredibly fitting. And operationally, the clinical oversight is managed by the renowned Jackson Health System, while the day-to-day logistics are handled by nonprofit organizations like the WestCare Foundation and the Advocate Program.
However, to make this physical facility work and to ensure the countywide CMHP diversion programs function efficiently, you need more than just money and a building.
You need a brain.
Exactly. You need an administrative central nervous system. You need a centralized entity capable of tracking the data, managing the grants, and ensuring that out of the millions of residents in the county, no individual high utilizer falls through the cracks.
This brings us to the vital role of Thriving Minds South Florida, which operates as that central administrative brain.
So what exactly do they do?
Well, they act as the local managing entity for the region. They oversee the state opioid response grants, and critically, they manage the deployment of the Florida Assertive Community Treatment Teams, or the FCT teams.
Tell me about the FCT teams.
The FCT teams are a fascinating component of this infrastructure. These are multidisciplinary groups of clinicians, social workers, and medical professionals who provide round-the-clock 24/7 care to individuals with serious psychiatric disabilities.
But they don't operate out of a clinic waiting for patients to arrive.
No, they go directly into the community. They treat the person in their own environment where they live, where they work, or where they spend their time.
So the methodology is entirely proactive. They aren't waiting for a patient to miss a therapy appointment and then mailing them a letter. They take the appointment directly to the patient to ensure compliance and prevent the kind of decompensation that leads to a hospital visit or an arrest.
Exactly. But Thriving Minds' most powerful operational tool is systemic care coordination.
Meaning data tracking.
Yes. They utilize integrated data systems to track these high utilizers across multiple databases that traditionally never communicate with one another. They have visibility into behavioral health records, primary medical care data, EMS dispatch logs, and criminal justice databases.
And the mechanical advantage of that is huge. If a monitored individual visits a local emergency room on a Monday, gets arrested for trespassing on a Wednesday, and then misses their scheduled AF-FACTI team check-in on Friday, the traditional siloed system would never connect those dots.
They look at it as three separate, unrelated events.
Right, but Thriving Minds' integrated system sees that entire sequence unfolding in real time.
And because they can see the pattern, they can deploy an intervention before the situation escalates further.
Yeah.
This level of systemic, real-time data integration is the actual mechanism that lowers the recidivism rates.
Right, because a community does not achieve a 6% felony recidivism rate through good intentions or empathy alone.
No, it requires relentless integrated data tracking to manage the safety net.
And it is precisely this data-driven, undeniable success that is generating significant attention from other jurisdictions. Major cities that are buckling under the weight of traditional mass incarceration are looking at Miami-Dade's data.
It's starting to have a real-world ripple effect.
Exactly. Like with Dallas County, Texas.
Dallas County serves as a perfect case study of a jurisdiction currently grappling with the exact breaking point Miami faced 2 decades ago.
What's happening in Dallas?
Dallas is facing a severe infrastructure crisis. Their loose-stare jail facility is aging, structurally outdated, and constantly pushing against its maximum capacity limits.
And when a county government realizes their primary jail is overflowing, the traditional, deeply ingrained administrative reflex is almost always the same.
Build a bigger jail.
Right.
The historical reflex is to pour hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars into concrete and steel to build a bigger jail. And indeed, county officials in Dallas had already begun taking preliminary steps toward constructing a massive new detention facility to solve their capacity issues.
But then they encountered the operational data from the Leifman Group in Miami. And the data from Miami-Dade preaches a very harsh, inescapable mathematical truth about the nature of incarceration.
The data proves that no matter how large a jail facility is constructed, it will inevitably fill to capacity.
It's like induced demand for traffic.
Yes. If a community does not address the underlying societal and medical mechanisms that are driving individuals into the justice system, the system will simply expand the population of inmates to meet the newly built capacity.
So if you build 1,000 new cells, you will just find 1,000 people to put in them without actually reducing crime. Recognizing this, Dallas County commissioners, including Andy Summerman and Teresa Daniel, along with their county administrator, decided to halt their traditional plans.
Which is a huge step.
It is. Instead of just building the jail, they traveled to Florida. They went directly to Miami to analyze the structural mechanics of the diversion model in person.
But this naturally leads to a critical question regarding replication, doesn't it?
Yeah, the why doesn't everyone do this question. Like, if Miami has clearly engineered a solution, if the math definitively proves it saves millions of dollars, the data proves it massively reduces crime, and other major cities like Dallas can see firsthand that it works, why can't every single major city in America just copy and paste the Miami model tomorrow?
It is the most important question for the future of criminal justice reform, and the answer lies in the deeply entrenched systemic and legislative barriers unique to each state.
Ah, state laws.
Yes, you cannot simply install a new civic ecosystem like a piece of software. It has to be cultivated within the specific legal and constitutional framework of a given state.
And the legal barriers are fascinating. Take Texas, for instance, and how their specific state laws create a bottleneck for Dallas.
Right. Under Texas state law, county jails are legally mandated to accept all arrested individuals brought to their doors by municipal law enforcement.
They can't say no.
Right. They can't turn anyone away. This law has historical roots. It was likely designed to prevent police from executing curbside justice or abandoning arrestees without formal processing. But in the modern context, it creates a massive logistical barrier for diversion.
Because the jail doesn't have the legal authority to turn an arrestee away, even if it's obvious they belong in a hospital instead.
Exactly. Whereas in Miami, the CMHP system allows law enforcement to take individuals with mental health issues to a pre-jail screening center.
So they bypass the jail entirely.
Yes. That screening center handles the medical triage and even conducts the first court appearance, completely bypassing the physical jail.
So for Dallas County to perfectly mimic Miami's pre-jail screening model, they can't just get their local judges and police chiefs to agree on a new policy.
No, they would literally need the Texas state legislature to convene and pass new state laws granting county jails the legal authority to refuse certain classes of arrests at the door.
Wow. It requires statewide legislative overhaul.
It does. Furthermore, building this ecosystem is an exercise in extreme administrative endurance.
Yeah, this didn't happen overnight in Miami.
Not at all. The Miami model required Judge Leifman and a dedicated coalition to engage in 20 years of relentless, often agonizing advocacy.
20 years?
It meant breaking down deeply entrenched cultural silos between rival municipal agencies that didn't want to share data. It required piecing together complex funding streams from federal SAMHS grants, state opioid settlements, local voter-approved bonds, and private foundations.
It is a masterpiece of bureaucratic engineering, but it requires absolute generational dedication to build and maintain.
It is a marathon of changing how an entire society, legally, medically, and culturally views the intersection of crime, poverty, and illness. And that brings us to the core realization of our analysis today.
Let's summarize the broader goals we've uncovered during this deep dive.
Okay.
We set out to understand the architecture of Miami-Dade's specialized courts. What the administrative tracking and the history reveal is that this is not merely a story about a justice system deciding to operate with more empathy.
No, it's much more than that.
Right. This is a story about a rigorously data-driven, mathematically sound approach to solving a catastrophic systemic failure.
By accurately identifying the high utilizers, utilizing the sequential intercept model to build clinical off-ramps at every level, from the street corner to the booking desk, and fundamentally shifting the municipal focus from punitive incarceration to systemic clinical treatment, they have engineered an incredible outcome.
They successfully closed a jail facility. They saved the county millions of dollars annually. They designed and funded a 160,000 square foot closed-loop ecosystem for human recovery.
And most importantly, they took a vulnerable population that was trapped in a 75% failure rate and dropped that recidivism rate down to an astonishing 6%.
They rebuilt the civic infrastructure to actually solve the problem, rather than just temporarily hiding it in a cell.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative structural question to consider.
That's that.
If specialized courts, intensive peer support, integrated data tracking, and comprehensive treatment centers can successfully reduce felony recidivism from an abysmal 75% down to just 6%. For individuals dealing with the most severe, complex mental illnesses and addictions.
Yeah.
What raises a profound question about the architecture of the rest of the justice system.
The implications of that 6% metric are massive.
Exactly. If this systemic rehabilitative model works so incredibly well for the absolute hardest cases, the individuals with the most profound barriers to success, it forces us to look at the baseline system.
Right, the general population.
Are we relying on a punitive, locked cell prison model for the general population, simply out of historical inertia and administrative habit?
Well,
When we see operational data this clear, we have to ask, might a systemic rehabilitative approach actually be the most mathematically sound way to keep society safest across the board?
it fundamentally challenges the entire rulebook. If the data proves that treating the root cause is vastly more effective than punishing the symptom, it might be time to redesign the entire system. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening.